live. I don't know if anybody's going to join me this far, but we're going to be doing a live on Secretary Rubio, who's testifying before the Congress. And it's a lot of other topics that he would be also testifying to the Congress about. So let's just pay attention. All right, so let's get started, okay?
Let me reiterate a point that I've made many times on the Senate floor. President Trump's actions against narco-terrorists and his capture of Maduro have made America safer. Every American should be thanking Donald Trump and Marco Rubio for what they have done. There are a lot of Americans today who wouldn't be alive if not for your commitment and dedication to stemming the flow of drugs into our country. The actions in Venezuela were limited in scope, short in duration, and done to protect U.S. interests and citizens. What President Trump has done in Venezuela is the definition of the president's Article 2 constitutional authorities as commander-in-chief, and wholly consistent with what other presidents' efforts and what they have done and actions they have taken to protect the American people from threats in our own hemisphere. In fact, President George H.W. Bush authorized similar, but much broader and more extensive military operations to arrest and bring Panama's Manuel Noriega to the United States to stand trial for drug-related charges. In that case, President Bush deployed more than 9,000 troops into Panama for more than a month. At the time, all leaders of the Senate, including Democrats, praised that move.
We have got to the point where literally anybody can build a fully working app without knowing how to code. This is base 44.
All right, guys.
Venezuela, with only about 200 troops inside the country for a couple of hours in a firefight that lasted less than 27 minutes, with no loss of life on the United States side, but significant casualties on the other side. This military action was incredibly brief, targeted, and successful. When bad guys are in the business of flooding drugs into the United States, drugs that kill our children, hurt our country, violate U.S. laws, and destabilize our hemisphere, then they'll have to be held to answer for those actions, and that's what's being done now. Maduro was not recognized as the legitimate leader of Venezuela by President Trump, or even by President Biden, or by most of the international community. It is a service to the world that this illegitimate leader is no longer in power. Now the United States has a tremendous opportunity before us in Venezuela. Because of the complexity of this operation, there has been some confusion as to how it will be done. I've been impressed by the way you, Secretary Rubio, have explained the plan to me going forward right from the start. It is clear and it's doable. I know you will lay that.
And I don't know. I remember the first time Secretary Rubio went on a debate with President Trump, and I always took a liking to Senator Rubio. He's very respectful, very to the point. He doesn't mix words, you know. He says what is in his mind, and sorry, not what is anything that is in his mind, but he's very articulate, and he's good when it comes to debating. So let's continue on.
That out for us here today. Venezuela's natural resources have frequently been used to bolster the economy of our adversaries, especially China. Through President Trump's actions.
So now, guys, you have to remember, he's testifying, he's being questioned by the Congress, and about certain not relatable, but certain things that have been going on with United States. Before we start, let me just say a quick word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I just praise you and I thank you for this live. I thank you for the people that are watching. I thank you that their understanding will be enlightened, that they will listen to what's going on, they will be abreast on current affairs, and that your name be glorified while this live is going on. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
We have effectively cut off that supply, giving the United States tremendous leverage. After our lengthy engagements in the Middle East in years past, many Americans are rightfully concerned about so-called forever wars. I know this administration is laser focused on avoiding those experiences. With Nicolás Maduro out of power, the United States has the opportunity to better protect America by bringing stability to Venezuela. The country has a history of democracy capitalism, and a respect for human rights. It is only during the last two dictatorships that it has lost these attributes. The Venezuelan people are not strangers to these concepts and long to have them reinstated. They have you and the President Trump to thank for giving them another chance. It is all our hope that the Venezuelan people will soon be able to hold free and fair elections for their leaders. To get there, Venezuela may require U.S. and international oversight to ensure these elections are indeed free and fair, unlike their most recent elections. Secretary Rubio, thank you for being here today. I look forward to a productive discussion, and with that, I'd like to hear the distinguished ranking members' views on these matters. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Secretary Rubio. Thank you for being here. I certainly agree with the chairman in terms of his comments relative to Nicolás Maduro. He was bad for Venezuela, he was bad for the region, and he was bad for the United States. I think the question we have to ask now is, was the raid to arrest him worth the cost? And I also share the chairman's admiration for the military operation that took him out. But the U.S. naval blockade around Venezuela and the raid have already cost American taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. Outside estimates are as high as $1 billion. And yet, the Maduro regime is essentially still in power. All the same people are running the country. Maduro's vice president, now the interim president, has taken no steps to diminish Iran, China, or Russia's considerable influence in Venezuela. One of the reasons that has been given for the mission. Her cooperation appears tactical and temporary and not a real shift in Venezuela's alignment. In the process, we've traded one dictator for another. So it's no wonder that so many of my constituents are asking, why is the president spending so much time focused on Venezuela instead of the cost of living and their kitchen table economic concerns? Unfortunately, I think this has been a pattern across the administration, losing sight of what actually advances America's interests and delivers results for the American people. Take the elimination of personnel and departments that were critical to our national security, for example. These are cost-effective tools like Voice of America that help us advance America's interests globally. And Mr. Secretary, as you remember, you strongly supported most of these programs when you were on this side of the dais. The administration says those cuts were about saving money, but the total federal spending last year went up by 4%, not down. We spent more, not less. As a result, our adversaries like China are expanding their influence. And there is broad bipartisan agreement in Congress that China is the central strategic challenge of our time. The president himself has said that as well. But we're cutting foreign aid and diplomacy tools. We're leaving embassies without leadership. We're shutting down counter-disinformation programs. We are driving talent away from the United States while Beijing is actively recruiting it. And I would just like to point out, this is a picture of the globe. These are countries where China has ambassadors in those countries. All of the red, those are China. And places where their diplomats are on the ground, except of course for China, which is in blue, and they don't need to put diplomats there. This map, this is where we have diplomats. You can see the red is where we're filled, and look at all of the white, where we do not have ambassadors on the ground.
Is that not obvious? The white where we don't have is because I think it's explained. It's Russia. It's different parts of Africa where it is, I think, Muslim territory. I don't know about Australia, why Australia doesn't have an ambassador. Let's continue listening to her. But this is a good question. Let's hear what he has to say.
We're even giving China some of our most advanced semiconductors. And after a year of tariffs that were supposed to make us stronger, China has posted the largest trade surplus in history. And American families are paying more at a time when the prices were already too high. Since the start of the tariff campaign in 2025, U.S. manufacturing employment has fallen by anywhere from 50 to 70,000 jobs, depending on whose estimates you look at. That's a trend that undercuts promises that tariffs would bring factory jobs roaring back. And instead of creating a united front against China, we're pushing our closest allies into their arms. Just look at Canada, whose business with
We're not pushing
the state
Canada.
of New Hampshire has been really critical.
We have not pushed Canada to go have any sort of alliance or trade with China. That's optional. That's something they choose to do. How could we push them? Canada refused to cooperate with America when it comes to tariff. There's a lot of things that anyway, let me just zip lock and just listen for a minute.
They recently cut a trade deal with China because they no longer view the United States as a reliable partner.
That's so stupid, right? They don't rely on us as being a partner, but yet still they share landmass with us, and because of if anything were to happen, if a bomb or a nuclear bomb was supposed to land in America and it lands in Canada, would they not be, would they not get hit too as well? We have to form a good alliance between America and Canada.
Pushing allies away like that is not strategic competition. It is unilateral.
But you know what? I can't wait for Rubio to talk about it, because I know he is going to rip her apart.
Disarmament. We see the same gap between rhetoric and reality in how this administration deals with other authoritarian regimes. At a time when Iran is violently cracking down on protest.
And to deal with authoritarian, to me, my perception, okay, I'm a Christian, yes, but you have to look at history. How did other regimes, other imperial countries deal with despots, right? And when I say despots, I mean people who are radical leaders who will kill their own people and the enemy. How they deal with it. They can deal with it with a meek and mild spirit. They had to fight back. So I see nothing wrong with America fighting back and standing up for its rights instead of being passive. You've seen for the couple of years that has gone, I would say 5-10 years now, look at how America has declined in standing up for their rights.
Yes, the U.S. is coming to agreements to deport Iranians in this country back to Iran. People who will face persecution and interrogation by Iranian security forces. And yet President Trump told the Iranian people that help was on the way. But the United States has largely stood on the sidelines as the situation has deteriorated. Americans are right in thinking that the Trump administration is tougher on our allies than on most of our adversaries. I just returned from Denmark, where I met with Danish and Greenlandic leaders. Senator Coons was also on that trip. He led it. What I heard directly is that President Trump's threats to take Greenland have shaken public confidence in the United States to the core. And this from an ally who first recognized the new United States of America in 1792, has fought on our side in both world wars and in Afghanistan. And I heard from one Danish-American woman whose son holds both citizenships and is approaching conscription age, that she's worried that her son might one day be forced to choose between the two countries that he loves. That kind of fear would have been unthinkable 2 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 50 years ago. There is no strategic objective in Greenland that cannot be achieved through cooperation. The only thing these threats have accomplished is weakening trust in the United States. That trust is the foundation of our alliances. And at a moment when Russia is waging the largest land war in Europe since World War II, We should be strengthening allied unities. Instead, we're undermining it. European allies are worried about open conflict with the United States. Canadian trading partners are turning toward China instead of the U.S., and the constant threat of new tariffs raising prices and making it impossible for businesses to invest is ever present. So, from Venezuela to Europe, the United States is spending more, risking more, and achieving less. That does not project strength. It hands our adversaries exactly what they want. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let's hear.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. We're now going to hear from Secretary Rubio. After that,
Let's
do
hear
a
what
round
Rubio
of,
has to say.
5-minute questions. And so with that, Secretary
And
Rubio,
that was a long
welcome back to the
question.
committee. We'll hope to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'll be brief in my opening statement so we can leave more time for questions. I've submitted a written statement, but I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to talk to you guys for a few minutes. And
All right, here we go. Suspend. You know the drill. Off to jail. That's a 1-year ban from the committee. Anyone who is a persistent violator will be banned for 3 years. So don't know
Yep.
whether the guy falls in that category. Looks like it.
Very
After
good.
3 years, you'll find a more productive means of employment. Secretary Rubio, we have 2 hearings a week. You seem to have a more robust following than most of our witnesses that come before us. But anyway,
there'll be a couple more, so thank you for stopping the clock, but I appreciate it. So, and I know there's a lot of other topics you're going to ask me about, so we can talk about those, including the ones that Senator Shaheen just outlined. But let me just talk about Venezuela in particular.
please.
I think we can talk, if you want. I'm sure your questions will be about what happened before and led up to in the operation. I want to focus my comments this morning on what happens now moving forward, because you're going to...
So there it is. Before we start, he's talking, and it's there for you guys to see. Secretary Rubio would be addressing or testifying on President Trump's military action in Venezuela. And Venezuela's acting president, Rodriguez, said she has had enough. Okay, so we actually dealing with him testifying on President Trump's military action in Venezuela. Okay, so let's just
ask about the going back. And let me just say this. What is our goal going in? We had in our hemisphere a regime operated by an indicted narco-trafficker that became a base of operation for virtually every competitor, adversary, and enemy in the world. It was, for Iran, their primary spot of operation in the Western Hemisphere was Venezuela. For Russia, their primary base of operation in the Western Hemisphere, along Cuba and Nicaragua, was Venezuela. In the case of China, China was receiving oil at a huge, about $20 a barrel discount. And they weren't even paying money for it. It was being used to pay down debt that they were owed. This is the oil of the people of Venezuela, and it was being given to the Chinese as barter at a 20%, at a $20 discount per barrel.
Wow, isn't that amazing? China was only paying $20 a barrel for Venezuelan oil. Oh my gosh. Guys, you see, you learn a lot, and it's good to listen to when Congress or the secretary or whoever is called to testify and to hear what's going on,
In some cases.
Instead of hearing it from a third party like the news, you hear directly from the source's mouth. And this is a direct source. This is Secretary Rubio. So you're hearing actually what is taking place.
And so you had basically 3 of our primary opponents in the world operating from our hemisphere from that spot. It was also a place where you had a narco-trafficking regime that openly cooperated with the FARC and the ELN and other drug trafficking organizations using their national territory. It was an enormous strategic risk for the United States, not halfway around the world, not in another continent, but in the hemisphere in which we all live. And it was having dramatic impacts on us, but also on Colombia and on the Caribbean basin and all sorts of other places. It was an untenable situation, and it had to be addressed. And it was addressed. And now the question becomes what happens moving forward. As I've described to you in previous settings and in individual conversations, we had 3 objectives here. The final, I'll work it backwards, because the end state here is we want to reach a phase of transition where we are left with a friendly, stable, prosperous Venezuela, and democratic, in which all elements of society are represented in free and fair elections. By the way, you can have elections. You can have elections all day. But if the opposition has no access to the media, if opposition candidates are routinely dismissed and unable to be on the ballot because the government, those aren't free and fair elections. That's the end state that we want: free, fair, prosperous, and friendly Venezuela. We're not going to get there in 3 weeks. It's going to take some time. And so objective number one was stability. In the aftermath of the removal of Maduro, the concern was what happens in Venezuela. Is there civil war? Do the different factions start going at each other? Are 1 million people crossing the border into Colombia? All of that has been avoided. And one of the primary ways that it has been avoided is the ability to establish direct, honest, respectful, but very direct and honest conversations with the people who today control the elements of that nation, meaning the law enforcement, the government apparatus, etc. And one of the tools that's available to us is the fact that we have sanctions on oil. There is oil that is sanctioned that cannot move from Venezuela because of our quarantine. And so what we did is we entered into an arrangement with them. And the arrangement is this: on the oil that is sanctioned in quarantine, we will allow you to move it to market. We will allow you to move it to market at market prices, not at the discount China was getting. In return, the funds from that will be deposited into an account that we will have oversight over. And you will spend that money for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. Why was that important? Venezuela was running out of storage capacity. Okay, they were producing oil, they were drilling oil, they had nowhere to put it. They had nowhere to move it, and they were facing a fiscal crunch. They needed money in the immediacy to fund the police officer, the sanitation workers, the daily operations of government. And so we've been able to create a short-term mechanism. This is not going to be the permanent mechanism, but this is a short-term mechanism in which the needs of the Venezuelan people can be met through a process that we've created, where they will submit every month a budget of this is what we need funded. We will provide for them at the front end what that money cannot be used for. And they've been very cooperative in this regard. In fact, they have pledged to use a substantial amount of those funds to purchase medicine and equipment directly from the United States. As in fact, one of the things they need is dilutin, or dilutin, depending how you want to pronounce it. And that basically is the light crude that you need to mix with their heavy crude in order for the oil to be able to be mixed and moved. They used to get 100% of that from Russia. They are now getting 100% of that from the United States. So we're using that short-term mechanism both to stabilize the country, but also to make sure that the oil proceeds that are currently being generated through the licenses we'll now begin to issue on the sanctioned oil goes to the benefit of the Venezuelan people, not to fund the system that existed in the past. The second is the phase in which you want to see a normalized oil industry. Again, look, we've got plenty of oil. There's plenty of oil all over the world. Canada produces heavy crude, so it's not like Venezuela as well is unique in that regard, despite the fact they have the largest known reserves in the world. It's not irreplaceable. But we understand that that is the lifeline. Their natural resources are going to allow Venezuela to be stable and prosperous moving forward. And so we've created what we hope to do is transition to a mechanism.
So you understand what he's trying to say? He's trying to say that this is a short-term goals or mechanisms for Venezuela. And the government, the United States government idea, or this administration, Trump administration goals, are to have a prosperous Venezuela, independent and free elections. And that's their goal, and also to make sure that the people of Venezuela are provided for. Okay? And the oil money goes towards the help of bringing Venezuela back on its feet.
That allows that to be sold in a normal way, a normal oil industry, not one dominated by cronies, not one dominated by graft and corruption. To that end, the authorities there deserve some credit. They have passed a new hydrocarbon law that basically eradicates many of the Chavez-era restrictions on private investment in the oil industry. It probably doesn't go far enough to attract sufficient investment, but it's a big step from where they were 3 weeks ago. So that's a major change. We can address some of the other components, but I'll run out of time. But one of the parts of the transition phase, or the recovery phase, is beginning to create space for different voices inside of Venezuelan politics to have an ability to speak out. Part of that is the release of political prisoners. By some estimates, up to 2,000. They are releasing them. They are releasing them probably slower than I would like them to. but they are releasing them. And in fact, you're starting to see some of the people being released beginning to speak out and participate in political life in the country. We have a long ways to go. Look, we can talk in more detail about all of these things. Suffice it to say, I'm not here to claim to you this is going to be easy or simple. I am saying that in 3.5, almost 4 weeks, we are much further along on this project than we thought we would be, given the complexities of it going into it. And I recognize that it won't be easy. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we are dealing with people over there that have spent most of their lives living in a gangster paradise. So it's not going to be like from one day to the next.
I like the way that he used gangster paradise. It has been a so-called gangster paradise. Yeah, Venezuela have the most beautiful beaches, as well as very scenic mountain ranges and beautiful waterfalls and whatever. But it has been a gangster paradise for decades.
Next, we're going to have this thing turn around overnight. But I think we're making good and decent progress. It is the best plan, and we are certainly better off today in Venezuela than we were 4 weeks ago. And I think and hope and expect that we'll be better off in 3 months, in 6 months, in 9 months than we would have been had Maduro still been there. So thank you.
Very good.
Well, thank you, Secretary Rubio. We'll now do a round of questions, 5 minutes each. I'd like to start, and I'd ask you to go. I understand we're not in a classified setting, but I think a lot of people had no understanding of the groundwork that was done before the actual action took place. I was incredibly impressed with what you told me about how you, the president, negotiated with parties there on the ground, particularly the parties who were going to be in charge after Maduro was removed. And I wonder if you could talk about that for a minute, understanding that we aren't in a classified setting. And I'd like to, if you could, say a few things about it.
Well, one of the things I've come to maybe more fully appreciate than I didn't when I was here in the Senate was the number of...
So he's asking him about the parties being in charge right now, who we know as Delcy Rodriguez, and the regime, the Maduro regime, is still in place, still leading Venezuela, still how should I say it? Still delegating work, still doing the normal duties of government. So let's hear what Rubio has to say. Chairman Rist, as I'm going to repeat again, just ask him some questions about the regime or the leaders or the people who are has taken over government, which refers to Delcy Rodriguez and her administration, the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez.
Contingencies that the Department of War plans for all over the world. The overwhelming vast majority of them will never come to fruition, but there's all kinds of contingencies that are planned for. And one contingency that had to be planned for is the fact that sitting in Venezuela with a $50 million reward on his head was an indicted narco trafficker. In fact, I believe it's the largest reward we've ever issued for anybody. I remind everybody the Biden administration had a $25 million reward on an indicted narco trafficker, the same person. And so, multiple administrations from both parties have wanted this man arrested. And one of the options the president had before him was the opportunity, if things didn't work out, to go in and remove this individual because he was wanted in a law enforcement operation. Now, obviously, a law enforcement operation against the de facto head of a regime is not as simple as going after some fugitive hiding in a closet somewhere. It required planning, and it required eliminating anything that was a threat to the forces that were going in to extract them. I want to be clear, and I'll share with you what I've shared publicly. We made multiple attempts to get Maduro to leave voluntarily and to avoid all of this because we understood that he was an impediment to progress. You couldn't make a deal with this guy. Okay, this guy has made multiple deals. He's broken every one of them. As a point of example, he made a deal with the Biden administration, and here was the deal that he made. It was a bad deal. We knew he wouldn't keep it. He made the following deal. Pardon my nephews, his nephews, who were convicted narco traffickers, convicted already and serving time in jail. Pardon them. Pardon and release Alex Saab, who was his money man, his bag man, primarily in charge of the portfolio with Iran. Release these people. He, in turn, agreed to release some political prisoners, which he did. Many of them were subsequently exiled or rearrested, and that he would hold free and fair elections, which he did not. In fact, he basically disqualified Maria Corina Machado and any other candidate, and Edmundo Gonzalez ends up being the nominee for the opposition party simply because they forgot to ban him, and they forgot to put him on the ban list. And then despite that, he loses an election that everyone around the world recognizes as a legitimate election. So he's made previous deals. In fact, he's broken so many deals, not even the Vatican has been willing to interact with Maduro in the past because he's broken so many of these deals. He's just simply not a guy you can make a deal with. He had no intent of keeping it. What he wanted to do was tap us along and buy 3 years of time until he could deal with a new administration that he thought may be more favorable, etc. He was an impediment to progress. None of the things we're talking about now, not the release of political prisoners, not the transition of the oil industry to a legitimate oil industry, not the erosion of Iranian, Russian, or Chinese influence. None of these things would have been possible as long as Maduro was there. And so this was one option that was available to the president after exhausting every other option to remove this individual from the scene. Again, I'm not here to tell you these are all going to be roses along the way and it's all going to go perfectly. But for the first time in 20 years, we are having serious counter-narcotic talks with Venezuelan authorities about going after narcotics organizations. For the first time in 20 years, we are having serious conversations about eroding and eliminating the Iranian presence, the Chinese influence, the Russian presence as well. In fact, I would tell you that there are many elements there in Venezuela that welcome a return to establishing relations to the United States on multiple fronts. We are at the end talking about a Western country that has a long history of cooperation and work with the United States. At one time, Venezuela, pre-Chavez, was a very strong U.S. ally. And we hope to get back to that point. We're not there. This thing still is in its infancy. But I certainly think a lot of progress has been made in that regard.
I was impressed with your description of the fact how careful you were in the operation not to dismantle either institutions or infrastructure because you wanted to see the Venezuelan people take that over and get back on their feet again. I think that was really a wise decision to make and have it as surgical as it was. The last thing I'd ask about, if you could touch on for just a minute, is I know you spent a considerable period of time negotiating with the people that were going to do day-to-day operations, the Venezuelans who were going to fill the vacuum. How's that going, and how do you feel about where we are there?
Well, first of all, let me understand something. I spent 14 years in the U.S. Senate going after these people pretty hard, along with many of you. So, I mean, I understand who they are, and I understand this portfolio from a personal level quite well. So we're very realistic about what we're dealing with here. We also understand that in geopolitics, sometimes that's required. And in this particular case, there are an alignment of interests. And we certainly think that the approach we're taking is preferable to some of the other alternatives that people speculate about or fear. And I would say at this point, I do have to characterize, again, being realistic, clear-eyed, and understanding that there will be impediments and unexpected events along the way. What we have found so far is cooperation, respect, dialogue, and it's not just me. As has been reported in the media, Director Radcliffe traveled to Caracas and met with leaders there and discussed important items of potential cooperation. I've also discussed, and I think I've alerted some of you, that we have Laura Dogue, who was our ambassador to Nicaragua in the past and to Honduras, will be taking over the Venezuelan Affairs Unit, first in Bogota, but ultimately in Caracas. We've had a team on the ground already there. We already had 70 locally employed to sort of maintain that facility, but we have a team on the ground there assessing it, and we think very quickly we'll be able to open a U.S. diplomatic presence on the ground, which will allow us to have real-time information and interact, by the way, not just with officials in the regime and with the interim authorities, but also interact with members of civil society, the opposition.
So you're seeing a part of diplomacy here where he is being very welcoming. He's also cooperating, showing that there is some sort of agreement and diplomacy going on between him and the interim administration in Venezuela. I think that's the best way for me to put it. So they are showing they are cooperating, more or less. They are agreeing and abiding by what the U.S. Administration wants. right, in order to make Venezuela prosperous and to move forward with, I wouldn't say regime, well, it's not regime change, but whatever they think would be beneficial to the people of Venezuela.
We think we're going to be much further along when we get them along the way. They've been very cooperative on that front. Obviously, there's some hard asks along the way. We'll see what the response is to those. But whether it's General Kane with his counterpart, or Director Ratcliffe, or myself with Delcy Rodriguez, we've established what I think so far has been a very respectful and productive line of communication as we go through this stabilization phase and towards the recovery phase. But there's a lot of work to be done here, and we ultimately are going to judge actions, not words, and that's what we're hoping to work towards.
Well done, Senator Sheen.
Thank you. I'm pleased that we are looking at a diplomatic presence in Venezuela in the near future. I think that's very important. But the DEA has reportedly identified Delcy Rodriguez as a significant actor in the drug trade. Do you agree with that? And if you do, how are we to assure the American people that the money that's going to Venezuela is not going to any of the cartels or drug running?
Yeah, and well, first of all, on the first point, I would say she's not indicted the way Maduro and his wife were. So I'm not going to speculate about newspaper articles and what law enforcement is working on. If in fact there were such an investigation, that's something that we would speculate on. Suffice it to say that this was not a normal system. We all should stipulate to that, okay? That regime, as everyone understood, was held together by corruption. The glue that kept people together was not loyalty to Maduro. It was the fact that these 5 guys had 5 separate oil fields that were assigned to them. These people had drug routes.
I understand that.
So that's going to be
I'm not defending the regime. In fact, I'm...
Okay, sorry guys, I was distracted. I had to respond to a friend just now. So let me just roll it back a bit just to make sure to hear her question.
You couldn't make a deal with this guy. Okay, this guy has made multiple deals. He's broken every one of them. As a point of example, he made a deal with the Biden administration, and here was the deal that he made. It was a bad deal. We knew he wouldn't keep it. He made the following deal: pardon my nephews, his nephews, who were convicted narco traffickers,
I think we got
convicted already
there.
and serving time in jail. Pardon them. Pardon and release Alex Saab, who was his money man, his bag man.
Okay, let's go a little further up.
In a very respectful and productive line of communication as we go through this stabilization phase and towards the recovery phase. But there's a lot of work to be done here, and we ultimately are going to judge actions, not words, and that's what we're hoping to work towards.
Well done, Senator Sheen.
Thank you. I'm pleased that we are looking at a diplomatic presence in Venezuela in the near future. I think that's very important. But the DEA has reportedly identified Delcy Rodriguez as a significant actor in the drug trade. Do you agree with that? And if you do, how are we to assure the American people that the money that's going to Venezuela is not going?
That is a great question. She could not have put it better. Now, she is which is Democratic Party, Mrs. Sheen. She asked a very, very good question, and this has been on a lot of people's mind, whether you're Republican or Democratic. How is this going to affect Venezuela? Delcy Rodriguez, as we know, is part of Maduro's regime, Maduro's administration, and how is it putting a person who is a part of that organization as the interim president? Let's just go back. So,
into any of the cartels or drug running?
Yeah, and well, first of all, on the first point, I would say she's not indicted the way Maduro and his wife were. So I'm not going to speculate about newspaper articles and what law enforcement is working on. If in fact there were such an investigation, that's something that we would speculate on. Suffice it to say that this was not a normal system. We all should stipulate to that, okay? That regime, as everyone understood, was held together by corruption. The glue that kept people together was not loyalty to Maduro. It was the fact that these 5 guys had 5 separate oil fields that were assigned to them. These people had drug routes.
I understand that.
So that's going to be
I'm not defending the regime. In fact, I'm concerned that we haven't really changed the regime enough, and that America's dollars are still going to
Yeah.
drug runners and to significant organizations
Yeah.
who we don't want to have benefit from the funding that we're selling now of oil.
Wow, she is really giving that. Okay, I'm conservative, but this is a very, 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 very good questioning. Of coming from Mrs. Is it Shireen? And that sounds like anyway, yeah, that's her name, Shireen. Shireen. I think I pronounced it correctly. So let's go back. I mean, very good question. Very good.
And providing to Venezuelan.
Yeah, look, I acknowledge that we are dealing with, I told you, with individuals that have been involved in things that in our system would not be acceptable to us in the long term. By no means is our policy to leave in place something permanent that's as corrupt as you've described. We are in the transition and stabilization phase. We are just acknowledging reality, and that is you have to work with the people that are in charge of the elements of government.
Okay, but
now, what are
can
the
you reassure people that
so the
money
way
is not going, continuing to go to the drug cartels?
Right, so that's the process that I outlined to you. So on the sanctioned oil, the oil that requires U.S. permission to move, that oil, the proceeds of that oil, which by the way is being sold at market price, not at the discount Venezuela was being forced to sell, is being deposited into an account that ultimately will become a U.S. Treasury blocked account here in the United States. They will submit, we will at the front end say this is what this money can be spent on these things. We will submit to them. They will submit to us a budget request. We want to use this money for these things, and part of the proceeds will go to fund a audit process to make sure that that's how the money is being spent.
So
and that's how we intend to handle those funds in the short term.
There's an actual audit process that's been set up. Who is
It will be set up, and we have a couple options. One option is the XM Bank. They have expertise as bankers and being able to do some of that option. There may be some others in place. We haven't finalized what that audit process would be. We've only made one payment, and that payment we did and retrospectively will be audited, but it was important we made that payment because they had to meet payroll. They had to keep sanitation workers, police officers, government workers on staff. It was a $300 million payment.
Right, so it's been reported that the oil sold for $500 million, that $300 million went to Venezuelan government. What happened to the other $200 million?
It's still sitting in the account, is my understanding at this time.
The account in Qatar?
Well, the account, yes, but that will ultimately be that's a short-term account. Ultimately, it will be a U.S. Treasury blocked account in the United States.
And will it also be audited?
Correct. Well, the audit will be on the...
Those are this woman, I like her. I like the way how she is, putting them on she's just doing a great job.
The expenditures. At the front end, we'll tell them this is what the money can be spent on. Again, I'm not talking about all the other revenues the Venezuelan government may have. We're talking about the revenues from the sanctioned oil. At the front end, we will say this is what the allowable expenses are. And then they will agree to fund, as part of the overall cost, they will pay for and fund an audit system acceptable to us to ensure that that's how the money was spent.
And can you report to this committee once that audit system is set up?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I'd like to change the topic in my short time that I have left, because when you were a member of this committee, you authored legislation to prevent President Trump from unilaterally leaving NATO, you and Senator Kaine. Do you still believe that the U.S. benefits from NATO?
We do. I mean, but NATO needs to be reimagined as well in terms of the obligations. And this is not new to this president. Multiple presidents have complained about it. I think this president just complains about it louder than other presidents.
Well, I'm just trying to be get a clear answer on where this administration stands relative to NATO, because it's been a very fuzzy message over the last year. And do you agree that we're stronger in confronting China when we do so with like-minded partners, and that China is still the number one threat that we face in the United States?
Yeah, but our like-minded partners have to have capability, and that's been part of the problem, is the erosion in European defense capabilities, because they've taken vast amount of the monies that these are rich countries. And because of the NATO umbrella, it gave them the flexibility to spend a tremendous amount of their revenues on social programs and not on defense. Now, maybe that trend line will begin to change.
Well, it's already begun to change, frankly, and thanks. And I think the president deserves credit for that, for the fact that there is now a commitment for 5% of GDP to be spent on defense. But part of that strength also comes not just from having the mechanism, the military might, but it also comes from the unity with our allies. And to the extent to which that unity is undermined, like the talk about Greenland and antagonizing Denmark, then it undermines NATO's ability. And the only people who are excited about that are Vladimir Putin and President Xi.
Yeah, well, I would say that I think our alliances in NATO ultimately are something that's going to work out. Our partners understand the importance of the U.S. presence in NATO. Without the U.S., there is no NATO. And we understand that in order for NATO to be stronger, our partners need to be stronger. And one of the things we've explained to our allies in NATO is the United States is not simply focused on Europe. We also have defense needs in the Western Hemisphere. We have defense needs in the Indo-Pacific. And it will require us. We may be the richest country in the world, but we don't have unlimited resources. And as we reassign...
Exactly why we want to have allies and partners to help us as we're looking at conflicts around the world. And when we antagonize our allies and partners...
She's very direct as well, and she's not playing.
And when we send Canada to do a trade deal with China instead of coming to New Hampshire or the United States, it weakens our ability to confront our adversaries.
Yeah, but our allies have to be two things. They have to be willing to step up, but they also have to be capable of stepping up. And frankly, many of them have not. I mean, Spain is still not doing the 5%. I mean, there are countries that are still not doing. And in fact, Mark Rutte yesterday pointed out...
So what he's explaining about NATO, now NATO is a group of nations that come together to help protect one another in aspects, you know, and it's a group of allies. And some of the allies are not giving... Let me just go in here. What is NATO? So I would not be tripping up on my words. Okay. So NATO means North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a group of countries that agree to protect each other, right? And this has been formed in 1949. I think it's after the World War II, where you know, and how it works. It's military and security alliances. So these are alliances that come together and help protect one another. All right. Also, there's as she said, there's a 5% GDP. Okay, so money is also being given to. It's like you have a group, and this group goes out on excursions, has parties, or it have, you know, they have a fund, and every person or every member has to contribute towards that fund when they need to go out or whatever. Whereas in NATO, they have a fund, or they have an account where they contribute money in case they have to use this money for arms, to pay the army, or for protection and all these other things. So that is what NATO is really. It's a defense, a group of people committed for military defense. A group of people coming together and committing to military defense of one another.
That if without the United States, the countries of Europe would have to spend 10% of their GDP for the next 20 years to be able to make up the whole. So I do think there needs to be a rebalancing, and hopefully...
Okay, so there's a whole, and there's a budget. So people are not committed to contributing their money. And some people are not paying, whereas America is fitting the bill for that defense. And this is something that has been going on for a long time.
We'll have cooperation. I think we will. Rutte has done a great job of managing all.
And I'm not arguing that point with you. As I said, I agree with what the president has asked of our European allies. What I'm arguing with you about is that his rhetoric is undermining NATO and our partnerships with our allies, and that's a problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary Rubio, for being here. So some of the comments from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are difficult to square with the record. the goalposts didn't move, nor did Maduro change. The only thing that changed was President Trump acted on what members of both parties said needed to happen. And did so, by the way, with an operation that will go down in history as one of the most impressive and tactically proficient to be ever carried out. So, Secretary Rubio, I'd like to get your response to a few yes or no questions. I know that's typically not your nature, but please bear with me here a moment, okay?
All right, let's hear them first. I hate game shows. Go ahead.
For years, the United States had a standing bounty on Nicolás Maduro, correct?
Have what, I'm sorry?
A standing bounty on Nicolás Maduro.
Oh, yes.
And this bounty was increased by both the Biden and Trump administrations.
You know where he's going with that, right? He wants to know who got the $50 million. And Rubio said he does not like questions.
And despite that bounty, did Maduro remain in power?
Yes.
Did he continue to support drug traffickers?
Oh, yes.
Was Operation Absolute Resolve a law enforcement operation supported by the military?
It was.
Did that operation successfully remove Maduro and his wife, and they were taken into custody?
Yes. Great questions.
Thanks. Were any service members, law enforcement officers killed in that operation?
Not any of ours.
None of ours, right. Has there largely been a broad support across Latin America for Maduro's removal?
Yes.
And is the United States better off with Nicolás Maduro in custody?
Yes, and Venezuela too.
Right. I realize that you'll hear differing views during this hearing, but I want to at least offer my personal congratulations to you and everybody who helped carry this out, because the world is better off without Nicolás Maduro. A few weeks ago, you briefed the Senate on your three-phase plan. You've been talking about it here today on stabilization, recovery, and the transition in Venezuela. Is there anything this Congress can do to be helpful in executing on that plan?
There will be in time, there's no doubt about it. On the stabilization front, in order to stabilize it, for example, we're going to have to begin to provide some licenses to OFAC. So as an example, if a company wants to go down and explore the opportunity to do some economic activity in Venezuela, they will require a license from Treasury to be able to do that. And so that doesn't require congressional action, but I wanted you to be aware of it when you start to see some of these things. Some of these are just exploratory. The second is, I think in time, look, Venezuela is a very wealthy country. This is not a country that's going to require money from the United States to rebuild, to stabilize, to transition. It really isn't. It has the ability to be, and it has been historically, the wealthiest country in the Western in Latin and South America, in many cases. The problem is that the wealth of the country was being stolen. And so part of both the recovery and the transition phase is ensuring that you leave in place a prosperous, free, democratic, allied with the United States and friendly, but also prosperous Venezuela, where the resources of the country are being being utilized responsibly and to the benefit of the people and their economy. So in time, I imagine we will be coming back to you with specific legislation that may be required to assist in that function. But we don't expect that this is going to require any spending on our part. On the contrary, unlike many of the other parts of the world we've gotten involved, Venezuela we're not spending any money in Venezuela right now other than whatever it costs to stand up our embassy.
Let me switch gears on you a little bit. One of the common criticisms after Maduro's capture was that this would incentivize communist China to take similar actions in Taiwan. In my opinion, this couldn't be further from the truth. For starters, communist China doesn't care about international law or norms. They've demonstrated that repeatedly. Just ask the Philippines. Nor does it believe in international law even applies to Taiwan. But most importantly, Xi Jinping's calculus on whether to take kinetic action against Taiwan rests solely on whether or not he believes he will be successful or not. In this sense, the tactical proficiency displayed during Operation Absolute Resolve may have actually given Xi more pause in taking action in Taiwan. Because despite its massive military buildup, the PLA continues to lack the experience so clearly on display that the United States demonstrated in Maduro's capture. And the PLA leaders that do have combat experience, like General Zhang, just got purged, or at least one of them did. So, Secretary Rubio, do you believe that the operation to take Maduro into custody will have any impact on Communist China's actions or intentions toward Taiwan?
No, look, The situation on Taiwan is a G legacy project that he's made very clear that that's what he intends to do. And that's going to be irrespective of anything that happens in the world. Your point, though, is well taken, and that is the U.S. in conducting this operation, I think, was certainly startling to China, to Russia, to Iran, to any adversary around the world, because the U.S. is the only country in the world that could have done this operation.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just real briefly, I just mentioned General Zhang getting purged here. He was obviously a very important official in China. Can you share with just your assessment on what that means, that Xi just purged one of these?
Well, this is, I think, part of a pattern we've seen over the last few years, which is a purge of leaders in their military. They're spending a lot of money on their military, and obviously some of these guys are stealing that money, and they're trying to address that. So it's an issue internally in their system. They're obviously not sharing.
Oh, this is something new. I didn't know. And he's talking about China and what China, some experiences that they are having in China right now when it comes to their Congress. I'm going to rewind that a bit. So I'm going to go back just to hear what the question was.
With us or talking to us in depth about any of that.
Across Latin America for Maduro's removal.
Yes.
And is the United States better off with Nicolás Maduro in custody?
Yes, and Venezuela too.
Right.
It was certainly startling to China, to Russia, to Iran, to any adversary around the world, because the U.S. is the only country in the world that could have done this operation.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just real briefly, I just mentioned General Zhang getting purged here. He was obviously a very important official in China. Can you share with just your assessment on what that means, that Xi just purged one of these?
Well, this is, I think, part of a pattern we've seen over.
Okay, so China has purged some general, okay? And so he's asking, what are the updates with that and what's going on? And this is something new to me, so I'm really interested in what he has to say.
For the last few years, which is a purge of leaders in their military. They're spending a lot of money on their military, and obviously some of these guys are stealing that money, and they're trying to address that. So it's an issue internally in their system. They're obviously not sharing with us or talking to us in depth about any of that, but it's certainly something we watch with interest.
Okay, so what he's saying is that China is going through a purge. They are probably firing generals, cabinet members, but they're not talking about it. China is very quiet. You don't hear much what's going on. Remember, a lot of people don't talk about it. But this is information that the U.S. have on what's going on. And when I say U.S., Trump administration, Secretary Rubio is now making that known that there's a purge going on in President Xi's regime in China because people are stealing money.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Ricketts. Senator Coons. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio. Good to be with you.
And you notice they use the word purge instead of fire. So when you purge something, let's just look up the word purge. It's to get rid of, right? When you hear the word purge, what it means to you? Purge. P-U-R. Purge. That's the right word. Do you mean purge? P-U-R-E-G, yes. So purge means to remove, clear out, get rid of something. All right? Unwanted or harmful. Officials were purged from the government. People were removed from their positions. Okay, so it's more or less harmful, but it's just to remove them. Okay, so let's just go back.
You again. My basic question is, what are we doing here? What is the point? What is the goal of this hearing? How do I know? As you know well, having served on this dais alongside me for 14 years, this is an oversight hearing. And the purpose of oversight is to encourage, if necessary, to compel consultation between the administration and Congress. And I just wanted to raise with you at the outset, of course the Commander-in-Chief has, under Article 2, the power to defend the American people against an imminent threat or an incoming attack. How else could we be kept safe? But our Article 1 power requires consultation. I'll agree with all of my colleagues. Nicolás Maduro's a bad guy. He was indicted. There was a bounty on his head over several administrations. His removal, flawlessly executed by American troops, thankfully none of them hurt, did cost the lives of 75 to 100 Venezuelans and Cubans, was a dangerous and high-risk maneuver. I am glad that it ended as well as it possibly could. But the point here that I want to make first is that it was rehearsed for months. The administration had a number of contingencies it was trying to navigate through. But over the course of months, when the administration was taking strike after strike after strike against drug trafficking boats, in several instances where senior leaders of the administration briefed this committee and others, we were told that military try and deter drug trafficking was not going to include the exact military action that followed. Yet it was being rehearsed. If there was time to practice, there was time to consult. And consulting with Congress is not just some high-minded principle, not some abstract.
If they were to consult, this is my view, and I think President Trump said it too, it would have been so much red tape. It's going to be so much back and forth. And I think it wasn't going to happen if they were to refer or consult the Congress. It's too much. But let's hear what Rubio will have to say on that. I'm not in Congress.
Thing, not a nice to have, it's a got to have. And look, the chairman opened by saying that this was limited in scope and duration, that it was executed flawlessly, and we should all be happy about the result. That much I agree with. But our president continues to threaten Delcy Rodriguez and the remnant of the Maduro regime with military force if they don't comply. We should know what are the policies, what is the path, what is the plan forward. You and I both know the long and painful history of wars that began and seemed to be resolved and then opened up into excruciating, expensive, years-long conflicts. In Iraq in particular, in Libya and elsewhere, things do not always go as planned. And so consultation with Congress that is truthful and forthcoming and transparent is critical. In your service in this body, you knew that, you experienced it. I was in the room as you held to account members of previous administrations for not coming forward as they should have. So
Rubio's ready.
Look,
he's set like
in
a
order
Jap
to avoid
Spaniard.
our
He's like
men
a
and
wasp
women in our armed
waiting.
forces going into harm's way, doubting whether they have the support of the Congress, consultation, hearings, and
Rubio is set like a Jack. We call it Jap Spaniard, and that's in Trinidad, and it's like a wasp. So Rubio is just waiting patiently like a wasp. You know, he has his poison sting, waiting to let it go. Here he goes.
deliberations are required. I understand the risk of leaks. That's a risk every administration takes. But at the end of the day, our framers
Yep, Spaniard.
entrusted the power of the declaration of war to this body, not to the executive. And where there is the time to consult, there has to be consultation. Second, I just wanted to talk about allies and alliances. I was just in Europe. I led a bipartisan delegation, as Senator Shaheen referenced, to Denmark. And our president's comments about NATO, about Denmark, and his attempts to coerce Denmark into giving up Greenland are appalling. They profoundly harmed our security. And I am asking you to do everything you can to reinforce our commitment to NATO. I was concerned that you just said NATO needs to be reimagined. Let's just be clear about the record. You know as well as I, Article 5 has only been invoked once, and it was in defense of us after we were attacked. Danes and soldiers from almost every other NATO ally deployed and served, fought and died. 52 Danes. And for me, the most emotional moment of my visit to Denmark was laying a wreath at the memorial to the Danes who served, fought, and died alongside Americans. So when our president says we never asked for anything from NATO, and they never gave us anything, and you suggest that they aren't carrying their weight, whether it's in bases, or in access, or in troops, or in service. It is allies that will keep us safe in the Indo-Pacific. Our treaty allies, Korea and Japan and Australia and the Philippines, are going to be critical to Indo-Pacific security against our principal threat, China, and in Europe. I'm worried that the very foundations of trust are being shaken. Our democracy depends on consultation with Congress that is truthful and timely, and the confidence of our allies depends on them knowing where we're going next. Today, an armada is steaming towards Iran. Our president is on social media threatening Iran, and I hope I can count on you, Mr. Secretary, to consult with us and inform us before our next actions, whether against Nigeria, Colombia, Cuba, Iran, or anywhere else. And I hope and believe that I can count on you to reinforce the sanctity of NATO, not to reimagine it, but to reinforce it.
This is what we don't want in he's trying to be diplomatic, but let's hear what he has to say. Let's hear what Rubio has to say, because this appeasing way and
Thank you. Well, let me unpack the 3 points you touched upon: consultation, NATO, Greenland, alliances in Greenland. Let me tell you on the consultation. Look, this has been a point of tension, not just in this administration and Congress, but in multiple administrations, as you rightly pointed out. I was a big fan of consultation when I was sitting over there. Now, it's a different job, different time. But it's not. That's not necessarily the point. This is a very unique situation that we faced here. The fact of the matter is that our mission, and the one you were briefed on and talked about, that mission remains ongoing, and that is the counter-narcotic mission that we continue to carry out as controversial as it may be. You may not all be fans of it, obviously, but it is happening in the Eastern Pacific, and it is also happening in the Caribbean Basin. The problem is, or the good news is, there aren't a lot of drug boats moving in the Caribbean Basin anymore, and that's what we had briefed Congress upon. This specific mission that you've talked about, one of the reasons why you rehearse it is to see if it's even feasible, to basically go to the president and say, is this something that's even an option on the table? The truth of the matter is that this mission could not have been briefed to Congress, because it wasn't even in the realm of possible until very late in December, when all of our efforts to negotiate with Maduro had failed, and the president was finally presented these options and made these decisions. It was also a trigger-based operation. It may never have happened. It required a number of factors to all align at the right place at the right time in a very limited window, and it wasn't even clear if it was ever going to be possible. There's also the aspect which I do not control, and that is deference to the Department of War on operational security. Despite the fact that we had kept this quite constrained, the truth of the matter is that this was leaked. We now know it was leaked by a contractor, the Department of War, that, had it been published, would have endangered the lives of people and/or would have probably canceled the ability to carry out the mission. So this is a real tension, and one that I'm doing the best I can to try to manage within the constraints of two things: operational security and also decisions being made. There are multiple contingencies for events all over the world, including some that none of us think were ever going to come to fruition. And in this particular case, one of the reasons why you rehearse these things in advance is to know whether it's even possible. Is this even doable? And what are the risks associated with doing, so you can present options to the president, who ultimately makes these decisions. In the case of reimagining NATO, it most certainly has to be reimagined, and the reason why it has to be reimagined is not because its purpose is reimagined, its capabilities have to be reimagined. Let me give you as a point of example. There's a lot of talk about security guarantees, and it's something that there's general agreement about now with the case of Ukraine. But those security guarantees basically involve the deployment of a handful of European troops, primarily French in the UK, and then a U.S. backstop. But in fact, the security guarantee is the U.S. backstop. It is not and I'm not diminishing the fact that some countries in Europe are willing to place troops in a post-war Ukraine. What I'm pointing out is that is irrelevant without the U.S. backstop. And the reason why you need such a strong U.S. backstop is because our allies and our partners have not invested enough in their own defense capabilities over the last 20 or 30 years. Now, hopefully that's going to change. Hopefully that is changing. And in some cases and in some particular countries, it's already changed. But this is a fact that we cannot ignore. NATO is going to be stronger if our allies are more capable, especially, and here's the reality, whether we want to accept it or not, we have interests all over the world. We have interests in the Middle East, we have interests in the Western Hemisphere, and we most certainly have interests in the Indo-Pacific. A number of you have already pointed out that China is the chief challenge. We can't have the same soldiers or the same ships in both Europe and in the Indo-Pacific. We have to pick. No matter how many ships we build, no matter how many capabilities we grow, we're going to have to make these adjustments. And the stronger our partners are in NATO, the more flexibility the United States will have to secure our interests in different parts of the world. That's not an abandonment of NATO. That is a reality of the 21st century and the world that's changing now. In the case of Greenland, I'll say we're in a good place right now. We had excellent meetings with the Secretary General of NATO. In fact, even as I speak to you now, there'll be some technical level meetings between us and our partners in Greenland and Denmark on this issue. And I think we have in place a process that's going to bring us to a good outcome for everybody. The president's interest on Greenland has been clear. It's a national security interest. It's a long-standing interest that predates this administration. It's one that our allies acknowledge is real. I think we're going to get something positive done. We're going to begin that process in a very professional, straightforward way. It begins today, and it'll be a regular process. We're going to try to do it in a way that isn't like a media circus every time these conversations happen, because we think that creates more flexibility on both sides to arrive at a positive outcome. But I think we're going to get there. And I thought it was noteworthy and important that despite your concerns, the president at his speech in Davos made very clear that the United States was not going to use force or military force in Greenland. So I think we're going to wind up in a good place. We got a little bit of work to do, but I think we're going to wind up in a good place. And I think you'll hear the same from our colleagues in Europe very shortly.
Mr. Secretary, the Gang of Eight has never leaked.
Senator,
It is critical that you consult with Congress. For us to be safe, our allies have to trust us. And for this committee to do our work, we have to trust you. Let's work together to restore
thank you,
that.
Senator McCormick.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Defending American interests in the face of Russian, Iranian, and Chinese encroachment in the Western Hemisphere is a key to the Trump corollary of the Monroe Doctrine. But Venezuela's new interim leader, in her public commentary at least, defends their ties to Russia, Iran, and the PRC, and had said this week had enough of U.S. interference. So beyond the oil leverage, which you talked about in your testimony, what steps is the administration taking to demand from the interim government to put incentives in place to ensure that they prevent malign actors, foreign terror organizations, and so forth from continuing to have influence and safe haven in Venezuela?
Yeah, it's too. I mean, yes, there's leverage, and I wouldn't just say oil. I think anything that's sanctioned in Venezuela, will, in order for them to normalize it, will require cooperation with the United States. But it's not just leverage; it's also their national interest. It's an alignment of their interest. The truth of the matter is that the United States will be a far better partner for a future Venezuelan government that's free and democratic, and even for the current authorities, than some of the partners they've signed up with now. Frankly, we think it's not in Venezuela's interest to have an Iranian presence or the sale of Iranian weaponry or anything like that into their country. So I think there's alignment there. We think and can argue that some of these criminal elements, which they've allowed to act with impunity in parts of their country, is a deal with the devil. In the short term, it provided revenues to some corrupt regime officials, but in the long term has created real destabilization, not for just them, by the way, but also for Colombia. Just understand something. The FARC dissidents and the ELN operate with impunity from Venezuelan territory. They control Venezuelan territory.
Yeah.
And some of that was through deals with individuals aligned with the regime because they made money off of that. But we don't think that that's in the long-term interest. And what's been expressed to us by leaders of the interim authorities is that they agree. And now we're going to test it.
Despite the public commentary, there's a recognition, you think, and progress.
Look, we all have politics.
Yeah.
Even in places like that. Suffice it to say what I've said from the very beginning, and that is we are going to judge based on actions, not words. And that's going both ways. You can tell us you're going to do all these great things. If you don't do them, you didn't do them. Or you can say, I'm not going to do these great things, but if you do them, you did them.
Good.
And I think we can point to some things now that show you, just as an example. Think about it. Within 2.5 weeks of Maduro's removal, they passed reforms to the hydrocarbon laws, which basically roll back many of the Chavez-era restrictions on private ownership and investment in their country. It doesn't go far enough. It probably needs to do more, but that's extraordinary. That never would have happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. It certainly wouldn't have happened if Maduro was still there. So I think these are signs of progress. Do they still have political prisoners? They do. But many are increasingly being released every single day, and some are actually being released and beginning to speak out again. And we're going to watch very closely how they're treated and how that happens, because that'll be part of how we judge them and their actions.
You touched on my second question, which is this long history of a very sordid history for outside investors coming into Venezuela. And the president and you had a meeting with our energy leaders in the Oval Office to talk about the opportunity to invest. And there was, worries about the safety of investing. What steps beyond what you just described in terms of the hydrocarbon law, security guarantees for workers, any sorts of a certainty that investors are gaining, which is going to allow them to have the confidence to move on the opportunities of Venezuela?
Yeah, I mean, the first step is some of these investors or potential investors need to get a license from OFAC to be able to even explore this. Then they need to be able to go down there and meet with people and see what's happening and make that determination. Here's what I would say. Venezuela has a lot of oil. They do. But there's a lot of oil in other places too. Companies are only going to invest somewhere if they know we're going to invest, we're going to make our money back with a profit, and our land isn't going to be taken from us. And if you try to, there's a court we can go to and contracts we can enforce. That's the level of certainty that we're talking in terms of security. And that's part of this transition process. That's part of this recovery process, is to normalize their industry. Because if not, they'll just invest the money in Guyana, or they'll just invest the money in some other part of the world that has oil. They're not going to risk it. So it's to their benefit to have set up a normal, transparent process that encourages foreign investment, not just in oil, by the way, in other natural resources, but in other sectors of their economy. I mean, it's unlimited, whether it's retail, whether it's banking. I mean, a country that's prosperous and generating economic activity holds the promise of all sorts of economic activity.
Let me try to squeeze in one more question, if I could, just in my remaining seconds, just very briefly. We've heard such differing accounts, and the president has spoken strongly, you have as well, on the deaths in Iran, and the horrible atrocities are being committed. Can you give us some sense of, we see reports of thousands, tens of thousands. What's the State Department's best estimate of what's happened on the ground?
Well, in the thousands for certain. And look, I think regimes, including that one in Iran, have learned that when you start shooting people in the head with snipers, it's effective. I mean, it works, and they've done it, and it's horrifying. And that's what we've seen. That regime is probably weaker than it has ever been. And the core problem they face, unlike the protests you saw in the past on some other topics, is that they don't have a way to address the core complaints of the protesters, which is that their economy is in collapse. And the reason why there's economies in collapse is because they spend all their money and all their resources building weapons and sponsoring terrorist groups around the world instead of reinvesting it back into their society. And as a result, have taken on massive global sanctions, which has isolated their economy and their country. And so that's what the Iranian people are demanding, is that they stop doing that and start caring about them and get these sanctions off them. And this regime is unwilling to do it. So the core challenge is the protests may have ebbed, but they will spark up again in the future, because this regime, unless they are willing to change and or leave, have no way of addressing the legitimate and consistent complaints of the people.
He has a point there when it comes to talking about the Iran regime and how they do things in order to gain control or keep control of the Iranian nation. And you know, before I started doing being a content creator, some of these current affairs, some of these geopolitical news I was not informed of, and I have learned a lot, and how certain regimes have survived and what they do to survive. So let's just go back on. He just touched on something that I didn't know about when it came to Iran.
People of Iran who deserve better.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Listen, I think the scope of the project that you are undertaking in Venezuela is without precedent. You are taking their oil at gunpoint. You are holding and selling that oil, putting for now the receipts in an offshore Middle East.
And you know that is a Democrat. The way he's talking there, you could tell.
Eastern account. You're deciding how and for what purposes that money is going to be used in a country of 30 million people. I think a lot of us believe that that is destined for failure. And I know that you're telling us today just to be patient. But a month later, we have no information on a timetable for a democratic transition. Maduro's people are still in charge. Most of the political prisoners are in jail. And by the way, those that have been let out have a gag order on them from the government. The opposition leader is still in exile. This looks already like it is a failure. You say you're in serious talks, but as you note, the Venezuelans are great at being in serious talks. They almost never deliver. So I'm just going to give you my three questions and hope that you'll...
And that's true. That's so true. He has that one, right?
answer them, because I do think we want to try to understand how to judge the efficacy of this as time goes on, because I worry you won't be back before this committee anytime soon, and to understand whether this is just facilitating corruption, both in Venezuela and here at home. So here are my three questions. First, reports are that you've given no bid licenses to two companies to sell Venezuela's oil. One of them is a massive donor to the president. To many Americans, that reeks. And so my question is, can you commit that partners for future sales are going to be chosen through a fair, open selection process? Second, if Delcy Rodriguez, who is an unelected leader, the head of Maduro's torture operation, is still in power 6 months from now, does that mean that your policy is a success or failure? How do we judge when we've had enough of Rodriguez? And third, in your testimony, you reserved the right to use force again in the future if the Venezuelan government isn't complying with your requests. So if, for instance, they refused to give you access to the oil in the future, if they said, we're just going to keep it for ourselves, would this cause you to consider military action? And do you concede?
I like the questions. I like the fact that they're putting him on the spot. This is what a diplomatic society is all about. And I like the fact that because an administration is in power, that doesn't mean they have to get away with certain things or do something without being questioned about it. And this is what a diplomatic nation is all about. And this is why I love America. This is why I love America. The fact that he's there, Secretary Rubio is being questioned. There's no debating. He's asked certain questions by both sides of the government, and it's just this shows what do you call it, freedom, diplomacy, democratic society.
That if you're using military action simply to try to compel cooperation from the government.
One word I forgot: transparency.
You absolutely need congressional authorization for that. So if you can answer those three.
Yeah,
Congressional.
So the first question was about the trading companies. The second is about Delcy.
How can my brand appear in AI search? How can I boost digital brand visibility? Introducing SEMrush One.
I think we're coming to the end. This is very long.
So here's the problem we faced. The problem we face in the short term is they had no place to put oil. They were running out of storage capacity for their oil. We had to move that oil to market very quickly. The only way to move it to market very quickly is to plug into these two primary trade companies that could sell it in the open market. That is not the permanent outcome here. That is a short-term fix to a short-term problem, which is they were literally storing oil. They brought in tankers and had tankers sitting offshore just to hold their oil. At some point, their capacity to produce was going to be shut down, and their ability to generate revenue.
Okay, I get it. Because I believe in Trinidad and Tobago, I did an episode on reopening the refinery in Trinidad and Tobago, and while doing my research, I found out that Trinidad and Tobago once store oil. Let me make sure I have that right. Let me ask ChatGPT. Once store oil for Venezuela. Just now. Let me just find this out. Store. Once. Let me see. Once. Store. Oil for Venezuela. So let's do a research on this. Yeah. So it's saying here some of the Venezuelan crude was stored in Trinidad's facility, including tanks at the Point Fortin terminal before being either processed or refined or re-exported after shortage. Beyond that, PDVSA, Venezuela's state oil company, was actually involved in Trinidad's energy community and participated in conferences, industry events. Okay, so this is true. However, the oil imports gradually declined and stopped by 2009, and that was during Chavez. Chavez died, I think, 2013. Somewhere 2013. Anyway, let's just go back. So that's important. So yeah, truly, Venezuela had no way
So we
for
had to move
to
that
store
very
oil.
quickly. The long-term plan
No
is not
way
those two
to
trading
store the
companies.
oil.
The long-term plan is for them to have a normal energy program that sells directly into the market, directly to refineries and to companies that are exploiting.
I think this is a great opportunity for them to use Trinidad to store the oil. And that would be a great idea. Would it be an idea? Would it be something that the U.S. could think about or probably thought about already?
And exploring it. For example, Chevron has operations there that never stopped. They seek to expand those operations. They don't need those trading companies. So those trading companies were a short-term fix for a very acute problem because we wanted to prevent societal collapse because they had no money for revenue. On the second point about her being still in power, look, let me say this, a couple things. This is not unprecedented. I can point to a number of places, Spain, Paraguay, two examples of places in which there was a transition, from an autocratic regime to a democratic regime, and it took time. I can't give you a timeline of how long it takes. It can't take forever. It's not even been 4 weeks since Maduro was reduced.
A year, two
Well, I think
years?
we need to be, let me put it to you this way.
I think Rubio has a soft spot for Dulce. I don't know why. And Dulce is also saying stuff to the news, to the media outlets that they're tired. They don't want to have America in. It's like a two-way street. She's saying one thing to them, and then the media is covering another stuff of what it is that she said. She says she's tired of the U.S. Telling her what to do. And then here it is, he's saying, well, she's very, she cooperates. She's in agreement with certain things and guidelines that they have proposed to her. And, so I'm getting like two stories. What is truth?
We need to be much further along 6 months from now, even 3 months from now. That may not be satisfactory to you, but I'm saying we have to be much further along 3, 4, 5 months. 3 or 4, 5 months from now cannot look like what today looks like. And I think there's acknowledgement on both sides of that. I can probably give you a better answer, and this is not deflecting, when we finally have people on the ground like the ambassador and the team around her on a daily basis that are interacting. Because one thing is for me to pick up the phone and talk to Delcy Rodriguez
Yes.
3 times a week.
Yeah.
Another thing is to have someone on the ground on a daily basis that's following these events, is talking to civil society, but also engaging with interim authorities. But the fact of the matter is that, yes, we want to see quick progress. As you said, it's unprecedented, okay? All I'm saying to you is, before this was stagnant. Before this, we had spent 14 years, you were involved in some of those efforts, 14 years trying to change the dynamic in Venezuela. 13, 12, 11, 10, a big part of my career in the Senate was spent on this. This is the first time in over a decade that we see even the glimmer of an opportunity to change conditions. A lot of that will depend on us, but a lot of that will depend on them. And it also will depend on the rest of Venezuelan society. How quickly can we get all these Venezuelans that want to go back to Venezuela and participate in civic and economic life back to Venezuela? That's going to be critical here. We recognize that. So yes, we have to be much further along in 6 months. We expect to be further along. And if we're not, we'll tell you. On the third point of use of force, look, the president never rules out his options as commander-in-chief to protect the national interest of the United States. I can tell you right now with full certainty, we are not postured to, nor do we intend or expect to have to take any military action in Venezuela at any time. The only military presence you'll see in Venezuela is our Marine Guards at an embassy. Okay, that is our goal, that is our expectation, and that is what everything that outlines towards.
But if
that said, if an Iranian drone factory pops up and threatens our forces in the region, the president retains the option to eliminate that threat.
I'm asking a more specific question because in your testimony you suggest that you would use force to compel cooperation, for instance, with oil sales. Do you agree that you have to come to Congress to get authorization if you are simply using force to try to compel cooperation?
Well, there's two things. There's the
It seems like
under the War Powers Act. No, under the War Powers Act, if we're going to be involved in something that's going to put us involved in a sustained way, we have to notify you within 48 hours after the fact, and then if it's going to last longer than 60 days, we have to come to Congress with it. We don't anticipate either of these things having to happen. Everything is moving in a very different trajectory right now. On the other hand, if we tell them we don't want to see drones from Iran, as an example, pointed at the United States or threatening our forces or our presence in the region or our allies' presence in the region, and they refuse to comply with that, the president does reserve the option in self-defense to eliminate that threat. We don't see that, we don't anticipate it, but it could happen. But we hope not. We don't want it to happen. On the contrary, if we had to take military action, it would set us back on all these other things that we're talking about. I can tell you, military action is not good for, recovery and transition. That's not what we hope to see. It's certainly not our goal here. But a lot of that will depend on them. But I think it would require the emergence of an imminent threat of the kind that we do not anticipate at this time. But that's not. They get a vote on that too.
Senator Brasso.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, great to see you. Congratulations. What you and President Trump have demonstrated in the past year is clearly peace through strength, and I appreciate the leadership from both of you. We've talked a lot about Venezuelan oil. You know, I focus a lot on energy going to China, and 3/4 of all the oil that went from Venezuela out of the country there last year, 75% of it went to China. They got it at deep discounts. They lots of money back to Venezuela through oil for loan deals.
China know how to get discount all the time. $20 per a barrel of oil.
Talk a little bit
That
about
was
the impact this has on China's broader
great
energy
robbery.
strategy.
Just to be clear, it's a quarantine, not a blockade. A blockade is an act of war. It's a quarantine, and it's been very effective in the sense that it's given us this leverage. In fact, can I just add something, and this might be to Senator Murphy's question as well. The Venezuelan authorities are now identifying ships that they want us to grab. In fact, about a week and a half ago, we grabbed one of these ships. That was, because here's what happened in the aftermath of the Maduro. About 5 ships took off without authorization from the Venezuelans, because they were controlled by some network in the country.
Wow.
With the cooperation of the interim authorities, we seized one of those ships. We brought it back into Venezuelan waters, handed the ship off to the Venezuelans, who in turn fed it into this mechanism, the short-term mechanism that I described to you was created. So we're seeing cooperation on that front. Now, I think your question more specifically was about China. Yeah, so look, China...
So what he's saying is that the oil was pirated, and the Venezuelan government didn't know about it. You know, they know about it after it was pirated, and they had to inform the U.S. about it to get back. That's something good to research on. Wow, that's amazing. I'm lost for words.
Can buy Venezuelan oil, but they're going to have to buy it like everybody else in the world is
Not
going to have
the
to
deep
buy
discounts.
it. Yeah, at the normal price, and that money is going to flow back to the benefit of the Venezuelan people in a structured way. And I know that in the short term that will involve this mechanism we've described. In the long term, our intention is that it would be governed by a democratically elected government. You know, I mean, that, like a normal country would handle it. But it's not just about oil. There's other economic activity, the full spectrum. I mean, Venezuela was, and still, we're not talking about some third world country here. I mean, we're talking about a country that doesn't just have wealth, it has memory, it has history of economic activity, of people who own chains of pharmacies. I know some of these people, of people who own chains of retail stores, including American retailers who had a presence there. We just want it to be a normal, prosperous country again, not a playground for Iran, Russia, and China in our own hemisphere. And we're going to try to help them get there because we think it serves our national interest. That will require actions on our part, not money, but ultimately that will require them. This is ultimately going to be on the Venezuelan people and Venezuelan society and Venezuelan leaders to make this happen. We're going to be there to help and assist and create the parameters for it, and we feel like we're making really good progress. If we make as much progress over the next 4 weeks as we've made in the last 3.5 weeks, I'll feel very good about that. If it slows down or it gets complicated, I'll certainly let you know. But our anticipation is that we're going to be able to continue to work cooperatively with them because it's in their interest and ours. But I will point out to this. After this operation happened, look at the people who criticized it. I mean, there were others. China, Russia, Iran, Hamas. These were the people that were upset about this strike and this raid and what we did. And I can tell you that in many countries in the Western Hemisphere, there was great pleasure in the fact that Maduro was removed and that it didn't involve an all-out war and an invasion.
Since you mentioned Iran, and Senator McCormick mentioned Iran as well, a lot of oil is still going from Iran to China. 1 million barrels a day last year. Lots of that money goes back to Iran, to the dictators, the people that are actually killing others on the street. Can you talk a little bit about what we can do to prevent that from continuing to go and what we're doing to support the Iranian?
Some of that is sanctioned oil. This requires the willingness to enforce those sanctions. And obviously that comes with a cost-benefit analysis. The Iranians are also capable of seizing ships and doing that in retribution. But that's certainly something that will be under consideration, and others have done that in the past. And we have seized, for example, weapons shipments in the past that involve Iranian and in fact, some of the ships, remember, all of these ships that we're seizing with the oil are with court orders. They're either one of two things. We either have a court order from a federal judge that allows us to seize it because it's in violation of a sanction, or it's a flagless vessel in the shadow fleet. And many of these ships here involve Iran. And some of that oil was going to be ultimately transferred to the excess refining capacity that China currently has.
So you mentioned the word shadow fleet. Senator Shaheen and I have legislation on subsea cables. I've asked you about that the last time we were here. The sabotage being done, directly being targeted. I know that Sweden and Finland have both detained Russian ships along those lines. We're going to have a markup on that bill tomorrow. Is that something you continue to support our efforts to go after?
It is, and it's featured prominently in the agenda, both at the G7 this year, as it did somewhat last year, but again this year in the G7 will be one of the top items we'll be discussing. And we've also been pushing it as a priority for NATO to consider. The two new things we want NATO to make a priority this year in our conversations are the undersea cable infrastructure and Arctic security, and the third is critical minerals and supply chains, because ultimately you can spend all the money in the world on weapons. If you can't make them because you're missing some chip that requires some mineral that China controls, you're in a lot of trouble.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator King.
Thank you. We started this operation on September 2nd with the attack on Venezuelans and boats in open waters, and now we are nearly 5 months in. Next week is 5 months. Finally, a public hearing. Wow, how novel. Finally, a public hearing in the Senate or House. This is the first public hearing we've had. 200 folks who are on secret designated combatant lists have been killed. U.S. troops have been injured. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent. An armada amassed. The announcement of a new Monroe Doctrine, which does not land well in the Americas. Democrats have been asking over and over again, can we have a public hearing? Can we share what we know with the American public? Finally, a public hearing. But even that hearing is constrained. I'd like to talk about the complete weakness of the legal rationale about the strikes on boats in international waters, but I can't because the administration has only shared it with members in a classified setting. I can't tell you why the domestic rationale is hollow and the international rationale is hollow. I can't tell you why the rationale for attacking Venezuela is hollow because, again, the rationale has been shared with us in a closed setting. I can't share with you the grim details of the murder of shipwrecked survivors in open waters that we all know because we've seen the videos and we've questioned the U.S. military officials involved about legality because the administration will not release that publicly. They released the boat strike videos publicly, but they hid the second strike that killed struggling shipwreck survivors, even from Congress, for nearly 3 months, but I can't really talk to you about it. I can't talk to you about the weakness of the targeting criteria being used to attack boats in the Caribbean and Pacific. I would encourage any colleague, if you have not, go to the classified setting and ask for a briefing on each strike and ask this question: what was the evidence that there were narcotics on that craft? You will be very surprised if you ask that question about every strike. And so even in this first public hearing, 5 months in, there's a lot we can't talk about. If it was such a righteous operation, Why is the administration and the majority in this Senate so jealously protecting the details about it from being revealed to the American public? I have Virginians deployed in this operation. I can't answer their families' questions. Thank God we're having a public hearing 5 months in. This is supposed to be the greatest deliberative body in the world. Mr. Secretary, who won the July 2024 Venezuelan presidential election?
Oh, I think the whole world would acknowledge it was Edmundo Gonzalez.
Who lost that election?
Maduro.
And his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez. Now, you have made the decision, the administration has made the decision in the aftermath of the attack that Delcy Rodriguez.
Wow. I have to say the Democrats really, they know how to ask questions. And they know how to deal with stuff. Very good. Should be eating some food with this.
Should be leading the country. Let me read something that President Trump said about her on January 14 about Delcy Rodriguez, who lost the election with Maduro. We just had a great conversation today, and she's a terrific person. I mean, she's somebody that we have worked with very well. Let me tell you what Delcy Rodriguez said the day after Venezuela was.
This is the same thing. Hearing him say one thing, and then Delcy Rodriguez another thing. So it's like, who's talking the truth?
Attacked. Governments around the world are simply shocked that the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is the victim and target of an attack of this nature, which undoubtedly has Zionist undertones. What the hell did Delcy Rodriguez mean when she said this attack had Zionist undertones? I'm assuming you have no idea.
Oh, I have an idea what she meant. I mean, what's the question?
What does she mean when she says this attack has Zionist undertones?
Look, I'd have to answer, but let me understand in a broader context. No one here is telling you that this is what we want to see in the long term.
Okay.
This is not a campaign to leave in place the system that's currently in place.
Let me switch.
But we either but I mean, the criticism of us is... All right, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm ready to switch now to talk about somebody that you know
raised
well.
An important point. If I can get back to it, I will.
You know well and you respect well Maria Corina Machado. Here's what President Trump said about her. Won the Nobel Prize in the aftermath of the attack on Venezuela. I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have... What does President Trump mean by...
Oh, boy. Oh, my God. Ooh. Ooh. This is hot. This is hot. I tell you, oh, my God. This is like, as you get older, you get to love politics a little more. I don't know why. This is like fire. Mercurly. He is Virginia. Oh my God.
By that.
Yeah. First of all, I've known Maria Corina for probably 12 years, 13 years. Have dealt with her probably more than anybody, as much as anybody on this committee has for certain. And I'll be meeting with her today, in fact. And we met with her a couple weeks ago. So here's the reality, though, and I think what the president was pointing to. And I think Maria Corina would acknowledge this.
The only way I talked to her last week. Well, she's very disappointed in those comments, and so are Venezuelans in my state.
Okay, well, she didn't share that with me or with us, but I would say this to you. The president is acknowledging is that today, as it stands, whether we like it or not, the elements of control in that country, the people with the guns, the people that control the guns and the institutions of government there, are in the hands of this regime. So we either, on the one hand, we're getting criticized. Some people are saying we don't want regime change. On the other hand, we're being criticized for not undertaking regime change.
Mr. Secretary,
what we're trying to trigger here is a process of stabilization, recovery, and transition to something where Maria Corina and others can be a part of.
You have respect for her, don't you?
Sure.
Okay, great. My last question is this.
And so does the president, by the way. He met with her. They had a great meeting. And he actually spoke to her last week in my presence.
Here's what he said after that meeting. We're talking to her, and maybe we can get her involved in some way. I'd love to be able to do that. maybe we can do that. We'll set the terms for this Nobel Prize winner having a leadership role. Last question is this. You talked about the speech in Davos. Here's something the president said in Davos. I'm helping NATO until the last few days. When I told them about Iceland, they loved me. They're not here for us on Iceland, that I can tell you. Our stock market took the first dip yesterday because of Iceland, so Iceland has already cost us a lot of money. President repeatedly mistook Iceland for Greenland, right? We're not mad at Iceland. They haven't cost us any money. The president just mistook the two countries for each other, correct?
Yeah, he meant to say Greenland, but I think we're all familiar with presidents that have verbal stumbles. We've had presidents like that before. Some made a lot more than this one.
Nice try.
You know, he shut him up because stumbles mean Biden. Biden stumbled a lot for his last term. He misquoted stuff. He stumbled on words. So Rubio hit him a punch there. Rubio give him a jab. I tell ya, this is like so good.
Let's see. We got Senator Paul.
He didn't even he gave him a jab and then he shut him down. He had nothing to say. Meaning that Trump make mistakes. He's human. He's going to stumble with one or two words. Most president does that. So did Biden. Wow, that was good.
Our founders debated extensively over which branch of government should have the power to declare or initiate war. Virtually unanimously, they decided, and what was entered into the Constitution was that the declaration or initiation of war would be the power of Congress. Now, we have many advocates, many of whom are here today, who have been advocates for an expansive notion of presidential power. They often argue that wars are not really wars, that they're kinetic actions or drug busts. I think, though, if you reverse the circumstances, it becomes very difficult for these arguments to hold up. So I would ask you, if a foreign country bombed our air defense missiles, captured and removed our president, and blockaded our country, would that be considered an act of war?
Well, I think your question is about and I will acknowledge you've been very consistent on all these points the entire career. So let me, no matter who's in charge. So I will point to two things. The first is it's hard for us to conceive that an operation that lasted about 4.5 hours and was a law enforcement operation to
Recording the perfect video take is exhausting. And doing it for every single update? Forget it. What if you...
with a $50 million
My question would be, if it only took 4 hours to take our president, it's very short, nobody dies on the other side, nobody dies on our side, it's perfect. Would it be an act of war?
We just don't believe that this operation comes anywhere close to the constitutional definition of war.
But would it be an act of war if someone did it to us? Nobody dies, few casualties, they're in and out. Boom, it's a perfect military operation. Would that be an act of war? Of course it would be an act of war. I'm probably the most anti-war person in the Senate, and I would vote to declare war if someone invaded our country and took our president. So I think we need to at least acknowledge this is a one-way argument. One-way arguments that don't rebound, that you can't apply to yourselves, that cannot be universally applicable are bad arguments. So my next question would be, let's say it's not a war. And we're just going to define it away and say it's not a war. That's one of the arguments. So it's a drug bust. What if a foreign country indicts our president for violating a foreign law? Should we extradite our president, or should we be okay if they come in and get him by force?
Look, I think ultimately we're always going to act in our national interest. And so if somebody comes after our national interest, like the case you've described, which obviously does not exist at this time, but the case you've described, the U.S. always has the right to act in its national interest and to protect itself. So really I don't know about this equivalency. Well, does this justify them doing it? We're always going to do what's best for the United States and America. We're always going to protect our system.
But the point isn't, and you're exactly right, we will act in our national interest, and we should. So I'm not disagreeing with you at all. What I'm saying is, though, that our arguments are empty then. The drug bust isn't really an argument. It's a ruse. The war argument, not a war, is a ruse. It's not a real argument. And we do what we do because we have the force, we have the might, we do it because it's in our interest. So we wouldn't let anybody come in, bomb us, blockade us, and take our president. We've had arguments about legitimate, illegitimate presidents, bad elections, rigged elections. So there's all kinds of same arguments that we've had in our country that they've had in Venezuela. But we wouldn't argue for an indictment. And these things aren't idle speculation. I mean, Netanyahu's been indicted by the ICC. And one of the reasons I object to being part of the ICC, and I would say you and the administration probably agree, is we're not going to let any international council indict our president and arrest him somewhere on foreign soil. We're not going to do that. Most of us probably object to indicting Netanyahu in that way as well. So I think the arguments are invalid. So we did get the legal opinion that Senator Kaine referred to, the OLC opinion, Office of Legal Counsel. And I think a lot of it's been released. Plus, they came to our caucus and talked most of the open about everything they had classified. So I will talk about at least one of the arguments. They say this war wasn't a constitutional war, therefore it doesn't rise to the constitutional notion of us declaring or having to initiate the war. It just doesn't rise. And one of their main arguments was not enough people died. And so there is some number that they aren't specific, but there is some number. I would assume, although I'm not positive, but the 50, 60,000 soldiers who died in Vietnam might be enough for them to call that a war. But here's the problem. It isn't the number, it's that it happens in retrospect. See, our founders gave us the power to initiate or declare war. They didn't give us other powers to execute the war. Those are left to the president. But if we have to wait to see how many people are killed, we have to wait, as they describe it, as the scope, nature, and extent. If we have to wait to see the scope, nature, and extent, the war has been going on for...
Oh my God, Senator Ron Paul. Oh my gosh, man. Come good now. Oh. Be a little more specific and don't be... You sound like you just want to hear his voice.
For some time, it's hard to vote to initiate a war that's been going on. And we can say this war is over, but we're still blockading it, and we may go back in, but there are no clear answers. We put 2,000, we leave 2,000 troops in. Are we going to call that war and initiate it? So the definition of war is very important, and I think we have to acknowledge the problems with our argument. Calling things kinetic action is a disservice to our soldiers. Oh, you weren't really wounded in war. You don't have a Medal of Honor for war. You have a Medal of Honor for a kinetic action. So I think let's call it what it is, and let's vote on these things. But I think we're in violation of both the spirit and the law of the Constitution by bombing a capital, blockading a country, and removing elected officials. And we certainly wouldn't tolerate it, nor would I if someone did it to us.
But we didn't remove an elected official. We removed someone who was not elected, and it was actually an indicted drug trafficker in the United States. And their system...
Our laws, indicted under our laws. Look, Bolsonaro says that Da Silva is not really the president of Brazil. Our president said Biden wasn't really the president. Hillary Clinton said in 2016 Trump wasn't the president. So you have these arguments, and I agree with you. It probably was, and most likely was, most assuredly was a bad election. He wasn't really elected. But at the same time, if that's our predicate, and you don't have to come to us because it's a drug bust, we're just removing somebody, you can see where it leads to, and it leads to chaos. And that's why we have rules like the Constitution, so we don't get
okay, Ron
so
Paul.
far out there.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna forward Ron.
Check and balance.
I can't with Ron Paul.
Investing on the front end to one end make money, pay back our investment plus a profit at the back end, and then depending on the terms of that investment, don't make a decision about whether it makes sense for that or not. Right now, what you have in Venezuela is a corrupt and broken oil company run by the government that basically takes this money, doesn't reinvest in it at all, and basically sprinkles it to its people to keep the glue that keeps the regime together. We want it to become a normal oil economy. That's what the ultimate goal is here. And in a normal oil economy, companies are going to go in, they're going to look at Venezuelan law, they're going to look at Venezuelan authorities, and they're going to make a determination about whether or not it's worth their investment. And that's the normalization process that we're talking about. That's going to be up to them. If they want to have a normal oil economy as opposed to one that is basically used as a way to feed graft in a very inefficient way, but didn't care about that. If they do it the right way, we think it has great promise and potential. over the long term, especially because these investments take a long time. But the U.S. doesn't have to put any money to encourage companies to go in and invest, nor is there any interest in doing so. But a lot of it.
That's a point I really do appreciate.
Yeah, no,
I don't want to see.
Well, I don't even think
American
that's even
taxpayer
been.
dollars going in.
I don't think that's even been discussed or considered by anybody. Your second point was, I wrote it here, but now.
It's the $300 million being redistributed to corporations in Venezuela, and
the second one was what? I'm sorry.
Lack of accountability over that. The $300 million has already been distributed
on the account. So that's not the permanent structure we want to see. In the long term, we just want them to have a normal industry where the companies are involved in it, they're selling it directly to the market, and we're out of that game. What we're talking about now is the sanctioned oil, the oil that's under our sanction. So we have to monitor how that money moves. So yes, the first $300 million moved for the following reason. We would all agree we didn't want to see systemic collapse. Like one of the things a lot of you told me you were worried about on the short term is this is going to trigger internal chaos in Venezuela. 1 million people are going to storm the border with Colombia. Colombia even stood up troops to their border to prevent it. Brazil was worried about it as well. It's going to lead to fighting in the streets between rival factions and shooting. None of that has happened. And key to that stabilization is ensuring that the government had enough money to meet payroll and meet their basic needs as part of the stabilization. We should not confuse stabilization with transition. This is not what the permanent structure is going to look like. The Treasury's handling the structuring of that account, so I would refer you to them, and I can get you an answer for them as to what the legal framework of that Treasury blocked account
That would be very helpful, because what you just mentioned, money to meet payroll, is very different than what we've heard about the money being used to give hard currency to key corporations inside of Venezuela, which would not be meeting payroll.
Well,
this is where complete oversight is required. We'd like to have transparency over how that's made.
Yeah, remember the first $300 million we're going to have to, on that one, because of the urgency in moving funds to keep the place stable, is going to require us to undertake a retroactive audit of how that money was spent, the first $300 million. But there's probably another $2.5 to $3 billion down the pike at some point, which will have front end through this process I described. I'm not sure if you were here where I described it, and we're still finalizing it. But basically the way it would look is we would send them a letter saying, on the sanctioned oil proceeds, this is what it could be spent on, and you have to agree to.
So what he's saying is there's money, the $300 million that was dispersed to them earlier on this month or a couple of weeks ago, is to help stabilize the country, because they need the money to pay workers, okay, to pay salaries. And that's government, right? It could be for the garbage disposal. It could be for, train service, public transport. It could be for government institutions, health, hospitals, and all that stuff. Salaries of the government. So in order to have the country stabilize and to hold strong. Whereas too, he's saying there's difference between transitional and stabilizing the country. And this is a transition right now, and things will change, once a new elections is scheduled. And so that's what's going on. I like the fact of listening to Congress questions and how Rubio is answering them. It's very helpful. So let's go on. I'm not going to stay too long. This is very long. This is the longest I think I stayed on live. Okay, so let's go on. Just remember to like, share, and subscribe. You're going to like me. Subscribe.
To contribute, you have to agree to pay for an auditing system to make sure that that's how it's being spent.
Okay.
That's the process we're trying to create. Again, on Friday will mark the 4-week mark of this all began. I understand, we live in a world where the items move very quickly. This was front page news of 3 weeks ago when we scheduled this hearing, and today other items have captured the attention, but we remain focused on it. So it's only been 3 or 4 weeks, but that's the process we're setting up with Treasury, and obviously as we finalize it, we'll provide that to you. But this is not permanent. This is not the system we want to see in place in the long term. We want to see a normal country. What was your third question?
Cuba.
Oh, Cuba.
Cuba.
Okay. I'll tell you about Cuba. Thanks. Okay.
Secretary Rubio, as you know, in our home state, this was very popular. Cubans, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, basically everybody in Latin America has been fighting. A lot of them are in Miami, as you know, because they've had to leave these countries because of socialism and lack of opportunity. So what the president did, the willingness of the president with your support and with Pete Hegseth's and military was very, very, very well thought of. So the first thing I want to say is on behalf of Floridians, thank you for what you guys did. Now, the next is everybody has these ridiculously high expectations, which we all do. We would love to have a free and fair election tomorrow. Where there was you knew that there was no
that might be
oppression,
my senator hopefully next year.
So tell us how should Venezuelans and Cubans and Nicaraguans look at this, and how patient should they be, and what would be the sort of the milestones you would give them to look at to say we are making progress?
Well, first I would remind everybody, let's just go back 6 months, 8 months, a year ago at this time. The Venezuelan challenge for us was frozen. It was a frozen situation. We had a regime that was entrenched. Its opposition was either in hiding or had been forced overseas. Edmundo Gonzalez lives in Spain. Maria Corina is no longer, she's very brave. She stood there as long as she could, but she had to leave. The others are in jail. They were increasing their relationships and outreach with Iran, and accordingly have the existing ones with Russia, Cuba, and China. And other than more sanctions and more speeches and more threats and whatever, it was a frozen situation. Now, for the first time in literally a decade, there is the opportunity that something could change. There's not the guarantee that something will change, but there is the opportunity that something will change. We have changed that dynamic, which goes back to the question that Senator Merkley had about Cuba. What we are looking for is the opportunity for a change in dynamic. That's a country that's been backwards. It has no functional economy. The people, you can call them Marxist, we can call them communist, but not even Lenin would recognize this version of communism and Marxism that they've instilled in Cuba. It's an economic model that hasn't worked anywhere on the planet. The suffering in the rural areas of Cuba are acute and they're deep, and it's not because of the embargo, it's because they don't know how to run an economy. How is it the fault of the U.S. embargo that Cuba, one of the world's largest sugar producers, now imports sugar? Because no sector of their society works. It's frozen and it's broken. But in the case of Venezuela, we have a glimmer of hope now, the opportunity to change the dynamic. Now, what that will require is smart decisions on our part, but ultimately it will require decisions made by Venezuelans, both those currently in charge of the interim authorities and those who may be in charge in the future as well to step forward. It is our sincere belief that the only way you're going to have a free, prosperous Venezuela that's allied with the United States is one in which every sector of their society is represented in their politics. And that includes many people who currently live abroad. And even the opposition, people like to say the opposition is very diverse. There are members of the opposition that were once part of Chavismo and turned against it. There are members of the opposition that have never been Chavistas, like Maria Corina Machado, and have been very forceful against it. So that broad sector has to be represented as well. So you have to have a process of internal reconciliation that allows these voices to begin to participate in the political life of that country, and that ultimately bring us to a point in which you can have a country where all of these elements of their society are represented in their politics. And look, there's a percentage of the Venezuelan population, I don't know what the number is, whether it's 15 or 20, that may not have liked Maduro, but are still committed to Chavista ideology. And they'll be represented in that platform as well. They may not win elections, but they'll be involved in this. That'll be up to the Venezuelan people. But our desire here is to have what's the end state? We want a Venezuela that has legitimate democratic elections. Sometimes elects leaders that are friendly to the United States. Sometimes elects leaders that maybe are not the person we would have wanted to win, but that's not unique for us. It happens all over the world. We're not disputing that Petro is the legitimately elected president of Colombia, and yet he doesn't always say nice things about us. But we also want a Venezuela that's prosperous and a Venezuela that's aligned with the United States. And a year ago at this time, this was frozen. Now we have a real opportunity, not just to create change systemically within that country through our help, but their efforts, but also one that is no longer a base of operation, the central base of operation for every geopolitical adversary we have. And that's what Venezuela was under Maduro. And that's what we hope and intend to change.
So would you, if you're a Venezuelan that lives in Miami, so what you would say is that you're working hard. There's a lot of variables outside your control, but you'd say right now, political prisoners are being released, never fast enough. The oppression is being reduced, not fast enough. Opposition leaders are speaking up more and more. So we're making progress, and you're going to continue to control the oil to make sure that, that we continue down this path.
What I would say is that we share the same goal and the same outcome we want for Venezuela. And the question is, we have to do it through a realistic process and get it happen.
All right, guys. So let's just briefly go over a summary. This is very long. My hat is off to Secretary Rubio for the great job he has done representing his administration and answering questions that are not easy, and to Congress. I always liked him, just liked him. He has a great personality. I said he's articulate, and he knows his job. He's very diplomatic, and he's the best that they could ever have to represent America right now. Okay, so here is what I'm just going to give a brief summary of what was discussed. His main focus: Rubio defended Trump's administration recent military operations that ousted Venezuela leader Nicolás Maduro, saying it addressed a major security threat in the Americans' own hemisphere. He described Maduro's rule as untenable and said the U.S. is now safer as a result of it. He argued that the action wasn't an act of war or occupation, but meant to aid law enforcement and stabilize the region. Rubio stressed that progress in Venezuela is gradual, not immediate, and that the U.S. wants to work with the interim authorities to rebuild the oil industry and use revenue for public services. He did not rule out future military action if Venezuela's new leaders reject U.S. goals, saying the administration still sees force as an option if needed, though there are no current plans for major operations. Congress transparency. He focused on this too. Rubio acknowledged some tensions between the executive branch and Congress over consultation on Venezuela's mission, saying that the situation unfolded rapidly and couldn't have been briefed earlier on, but he still defends the decisions made. Lawmakers pressured him on legal authority, transparency, and oversight. Some Republicans supported his defense on the policy, while Democrats raised questions about executive power and long-term strategy. Another point is broader foreign policy notes. Rubio also touched on other international matters in his responses, including NATO, Arctic security, and relations with global adversaries. Okay, and he did this through details may be coming as the hearing continues. Bottom line is, Rubio testimony today has been about justifying the U.S. approach to Venezuela, framing recent operations as necessary for security, defending the administration's choice, acknowledging ongoing progress, and leaving open the possibility of future action if needed. Congressional reactions are mixed, and the debate oversight and what comes next. So, guys, thank you for staying on with me. This has been a long live. This is something I am passionate about. So, feel free to join me on my next live, which would be sometime this week. I can't say when, but I only go on live when there is a geopolitical how should I say it, geopolitical episode or speech, or if one of a president is giving a speech that coincides with my niche. So thank you for staying on, and I'm looking forward in having a chat with you. And remember, who God bless, no man curse, and if God be for America, who could be against her? Bye.